Okay, now we're going to look at the title. If you notice in some Bibles, it'll say different things, like it'll just say Hebrews, or it will say the Apostle Paul to the Hebrews, or it will say the letter to the Hebrews. So that's what we're going to look at is number one, title discrepancies. Title discrepancies. Now, why is this important? I want to remind you, the atheists, the agnostics, and those that have different beliefs, and a lot of times they'll be in different cults, they have studied this stuff and they've got information that you may not even be familiar with. I was not familiar with it either until I dug into this study. So wouldn't it be nice if Christians begin to familiarize themselves with these things so they're not like a calf staring at a new gate whenever they are confronted by a cult of some kind, or agnostics or atheists and people that have already found information that causes them to turn against the Bible, against theology. There are a lot of people that went into these seminaries and these like Harvard and Yale and these other esteemed colleges, went in with every intention to be a Greek scholar or to be, a pastor or something like that, went in and came out hardcore atheists, not even believing in God. They are out there by the hundreds. And I don't know if you've ever took the time to just kind of be familiar with what are they saying? What are they saying? So that you're aware of what's going on in the enemy's camp, so that you are a good soldier, so you're not dumbfounded and looking like a complete idiot if one walks in your church and is talking to your church members and saying things and you're like, well, I've never heard of that. We need to study. We need to understand what's going on with the book of Hebrews and in title discrepancies. Title discrepancies. Some Bibles put to the Hebrews from Paul. Now we're going to get into authorship. Not everybody believed it was Paul, and there's a lot of reasons to believe it wasn't Paul. A lot of reasons to believe it was Paul. There's no scriptures that say it was Paul. It goes to scholarship. It goes to, studying the times and trying to decide, what is true here. Some Bibles put to Hebrews from Paul, but the King James Version and some traditional older translations specifically label the book as the Epistle of Paul the Apostle to the Hebrews. This attribution stems from early church traditions and the inclusion of Hebrews alongside Pauline letters in early manuscripts like B46, circa 200 AD. Now, if you don't know what circa means, you got to go back to introduction number 1, where I describe that. Okay, so this attribution stems from early church traditions and the inclusion of Hebrews alongside Pauline letters in early manuscripts. So we're going to see how this happened. Hebrews was alongside other Pauline manuscripts. So because of that, they just attributed it to Paul. It's there. They found it alongside those manuscripts. So, guilty by association. Papyrus 46 is one of the oldest and most significant New Testament manuscripts, dated to approximately 200 AD, with some estimates ranging from 175 to 225 AD. It is part of the Chester Beatty Biblical Papyri collection and contains a large portion of the Pauline epistles. Okay, so now remember, the attribution of the book of Hebrews being labeled as the Epistle of Paul the Apostle had to do with it being stemmed from the early church traditions and the inclusion of Hebrews alongside Pauline letters in the early manuscripts from Papyrus 46, circa 200 AD. All right, Papyrus 46 is one of the oldest and most significant New Testament manuscripts, dated approximately 200 AD, some estimates ranging from 175 to 225. That's why they said circa, meaning about or around. It is part of the Chester Beatty Biblical Papyri collection and contains a large portion of the Pauline epistles. All right, so that's what that is. Now, in 2 Thessalonians 3:17, it says, the salutation of Paul with mine own hand, which is the token in every epistle, so I write. Here's an indicator that in every epistle that Paul writes, he says, the salutation of Paul with mine own hand, which is the token in every epistle, so I write. Let's look at the amplified version of that, 2 Thessalonians 3:17. He says, I, Paul, write you this final greeting with mine own hand. This is the distinguishing mark in every letter of mine that shows it is genuine. It is the way I write, my handwriting and signature. So his salutation is in every one of his letters. You get that? Paul's salutation is his distinguishing mark in every one of his letters. Why? Because there were a lot of fakes and phonies. The information war was going on even back then, just like it is today. There was a lot of fake epistles that was being written, claiming to be Paul. The opening chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, does not have the customary greetings of a letter. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to show you there are reasons to believe that it was not Paul, in spite of the fact that just because Hebrews was found along the manuscripts of the other Pauline epistles that had his customary mark and salutation in it, just because it was there, does not necessarily mean that it was written by Paul. Hebrews does not have the salutation of Paul in it. And not only that, but in the opening chapter of chapter 1, Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 through 4, it does not have the customary greetings of a letter that Paul has in his normal letters. I, Paul, as servant of Jesus Christ. I, Paul, an apostle of Jesus Christ. Paul always, for the most part, always greeted people. But instead, it starts off as a powerful sermon. And the title could very easily be The Superiority of Jesus Christ. There's no indicator that there's any salutation or any sign-off of Paul signing off, and there's no indication of any greeting in the very first part of Hebrews chapter 1, in the very first verses. No greeting and no sign-off of Paul. Hebrews is unsigned and has no intro that identifies the author at all. But if I were to go to my Bible right now, the letter to the Hebrews, and if I were to go to that, it says, the epistle of Paul the apostle to the Hebrews. Where do they get that from? Okay. Now this is important to know that whenever somebody, and we're going to get into this later on, certain cults, certain people with an agenda that will challenge your belief system based on the actual title of the book of Hebrews, believe it or not. And if you're not familiar with why it's so and how it became so, you'll be caught off guard. Title discrepancies. That's what we're talking about. Early church fathers and scholars, namely Origen, thought that someone familiar with Paul's teachings wrote Hebrews, but he added his now famous remark that who really wrote the letter is known to God alone. So Origen. Now you got to remember the early church fathers. The early church fathers were the ones that were discipled by the church, by the apostles. The early church fathers, like Origen, okay, and Polycarp, okay, and others, were discipled by the apostles. They were there whenever Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the apostle Paul, Peter, whenever they were alive and were preaching the gospel. They were discipled by the apostles. So they were the closest ones to them. So Origen, being the closest ones to Paul, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and all the 12, they did not think that Paul wrote it. Origen is one of the ones that voice his opinion. Origen thought that someone familiar with Paul's teachings wrote the letter to the Hebrews. And later he added a famous remark where he said, who really wrote the letter is known to God alone. Only God knows who wrote the letter to Hebrews. So that's the early church fathers, or Origen. Gleason Leander Archer Jr., who lived from May 22nd, 1916 to April 27th, 2004, was an American biblical scholar, theologian, educator, and author. He is notable for his work on well-known Bible translations and for his defense of biblical inerrancy. Archer points out that none of the ancient authorities entertained any doubt as to the canonicity of the epistle. However, quote, in any event, the primary author is God himself, no matter which human instrument he used. Now, this is coming from Gleason Leonard Archer Jr., who is an American biblical scholar, theologian, educator, and author. Now, I'm just giving you a few. Okay, I'm just giving you a few. There's many. And some are varying back and forth. All right, some are varying back and forth. So the views vary. And I'm just giving you enough to understand which directions these views go. Now, in the ancient Christian commentary, under who wrote Hebrews, the early Alexandrian expounder and textual interpreter Pantheanus and Clement accepted Pauline authorship. So these early textual interpreters, they accepted Pauline authorship. Though Clement, who is an early church father that was discipled right under the apostles, suggested that the stylistic differences in Hebrews are due to Luke translating Paul's letter from the original Hebrew to Greek, and became the traditional opinion of the medieval Western Church. And that was taken from Eusebius' Ecclesiastical History, section 6-14-1 through 4. And Origen refined his notion to suggest that the final shape of the letter represented a different order of redaction from that of translation. So now I'm not going to go deep to the point of numbness, but I'm trying to show you how that just in the discrepancy of the title of the letter to the Hebrews, how that way back, even before the apostles died and the early church fathers died, they were grappling over who wrote it. That's a long time ago. In a papyrus manuscript that contains the earliest Greek collection of Paul's letters that has survived circa 200 AD, Hebrews follows Romans, an indication of its perceived importance and authorship in the Eastern tradition. Did you catch that? In a papyrus manuscript that contains the earliest Greek collection of Paul's letters, Hebrews follows Romans. Now, if I go to my Bible today, Hebrews does not follow Romans. They looked at it as an indication of its perceived importance and authority in Eastern tradition. Now, I've been looking into that myself. It is amazing that the Ethiopian Eastern Coptic Orthodox Church has a much different view of manuscripts and canonicity of scriptures than we do. I'm not going to get into it right now, but they have a different view, a different understanding. And Ethiopia was the very first part of the globe that received and held onto and became a steward of Christianity and of its manuscripts and scriptures. All right, by comparison, Hebrews is missing from the Latin Muratorian canon. In the West, it is not until Jerome, circa AD 347 to 420, and Augustine, circa AD 354 to 430, that the work received its powerful advocates. Now, I don't know if you caught that or not. Okay, but go back and listen to it. Why it is thought not to be Paul. The book of Hebrews is not considered Paul's writing due to its anonymous nature. A highly polished and formal Greek style different from its other letters and theological arguments that set it apart from his known theology. Additionally, the author in Hebrews distinguishes himself from the original eyewitnesses of Jesus' ministry, which conflicts with Paul's own claim of having received the gospel directly from God, and the author refers to Jesus as the high priest, a concept central to Hebrews but absent in Paul's letters. That's interesting. All right, the Muratorian fragment. The Muratorian canon was discovered by Italian historian Ludovico Muratoria in the Ambrosian Library in northern Italy and was published by him in 1740. The Muratorian fragment is the oldest surviving list of New Testament books, likely from AD 170 to 200, discovered by Ludovico Antonio Muratori in an 8th century manuscript, listing 22 of the 27 books later canonized, including the Gospels, Acts, most Pauline letters, Jude, 1 John, 2 John, and Revelation, while omitting books like James, Hebrews, 1st and 2nd Peter, and 3rd John, but including the Shepherd of Hermas for private reading. You have access to the internet, okay? So you can, you're okay to study on your own, okay? I'm not going to belabor this, all right? Go look up the Muratorian fragment and follow what I'm saying. Just like when I was in Bible school, this is to lay the foundation. This is the basics for you to build on. Keep studying, all right? The summation of books contained in the Muratorian canon. Okay, so this is the summation of books contained in the Muratorian canon. So the books listed in the Muratorian canon are as follows. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Acts, letters of Paul to the churches, all right, which was Corinthians, 1st and 2nd, and Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Galatians, both Thessalonians, and Romans. The letters of Paul to individuals, Philemon, Titus, and Timothy, both of them, Jude, 1st, 2nd John. The wisdom of Solomon, the revelation of John, revelation of Peter, and shepherd of Hermas. It was good, but not to be read in the church. Okay, that's how they viewed it. This leaves out Hebrews, James, 1st and 2nd Peter, and 3rd John. That's not unusual in the West in the 2nd century. Okay, this was not unusual in the West in the 2nd century, 200 years after Christ's birth. Okay, the inclusion of the Wisdom of Solomon as a New Testament book in the Muratorian canon is interesting as well. Every other list I found up to about 400 AD either doesn't mention it or puts it among the Old Testament writings. Hebrews is also missing from the set of Pauline commentaries produced by Ambrosiaster, circa AD 366 to 384. The complicated reception history of Hebrews extends this silence forward in time. There is, for example, no extensive Latin commentary on Hebrews until Lucian, AD 735 through 804, circa. The questions regarding authorship resurface in the West among Erasmus, Luther, and Calvin. Okay, so now we're getting up towards the Reformation. The questions regarding authorship resurface again in the West among Erasmus, Luther, and Calvin. Luther noting the theological distinctiveness of the letter, as well as the elegance of the Greek and its expository styles, whom Acts 18:24 describes as Jewish from Alexandria, an eloquent man well versed in the scriptures. All right, so that's Luther. That was his estimate of who the author was of Hebrews. What we're going to do is we're going to, I think, stop it right there and give you enough to chew on, to think about. I got more. We're going to work our way through this. I want everybody to stick with me. I welcome you. Okay, I want you to be a part of this. Ask questions. Make sure you hit that like button for me.